Some say great teams are just like a family, but what happens when the team is really family?
This podcast is brought to you by Arcamed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of Arcamed.
And I'm Caroline Squatrigo, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-size company culture. Join us. Well, welcome back to the show, Derek. For those of you who may not have heard, the last time Derek was with us, Derek Yankee is Arcamed's operations manager, and him and his wife, Sam, also own a local Indianapolis business, Invista Optical. Derek, welcome on.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
So, Derek, when Greg and I decided to talk about family businesses, you and Sam immediately popped in my head. I, for one, love Invista Opticals. Love going there. You guys do a great job. But I do wonder, you're running this business with your wife. I know, you have some employees that you guys are pretty close with. How does this all work? How does this blend together between family life and business life?
Well, first of all, thanks for the plug. We appreciate it. Always happy to get our name out there a little more. It is an interesting situation that we have. It's not something we really thought about before starting the business, but it's become a scenario where we don't really separate our work life in the Invista Optical sense, our work life from our personal lives. It impacts everything we do, whether it's making decisions to go on vacation or childcare or any decision that will have a financial impact whatsoever to the business or our personal finances. It's all intermingled directly, so it plays into everything we do.
Yeah, and I wonder, do you feel like, it seems like I've been in there, it seems like you guys have a pretty like familial culture in Invista. Do you feel like the fact that you and Sam are so like hands-on and you two are obviously a family, does that like come into play in your culture at all with your employees?
Absolutely. I think some of that's by design and some of that has just been reinforced very naturally. They see the passion that we have in upholding our mission of service excellence and having the highest quality products and delivery of that to our customers. And it's never questioned. They always, our team always understands that, and they feed off of that, and that develops the culture even further in that sense.
Well, I know you guys have been embraced very well by the community, and I know why, because like I said, you guys do a great job. Anything you want to leave our listeners with about family businesses before you go?
Well, Sam and I did start this business, but I've also been involved in family businesses my entire life. My dad and grandfather own, my grandfather's since passed, but they started a business almost 35 years ago that's still going strong. So I've been used to this my whole life, but while it has its challenges, the rewards are very great as well. So I would highly encourage anybody that's interested to consider it and to not be afraid of it. That's for sure.
Well, thanks, Derek. And I'm excited to hear from our next guest, Steve Walker. He a little bit different. He's like the third generation in his family currently running Walker. So we'll see what he has to say and compare it all at the end. But thanks for coming on, Derek.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Caroline.
Okay, we're super excited to have Steve Walker with us to talk a little bit about how he views company culture and how a family business impacts company culture. As the third generation of Walkers, Steve was named president of experience management services firm Walker in 94, CEO in 96, and chairman of the board in 2006. Steve is also the co-creator and host of the popular podcast, the CX Leader Podcast, which we envy as it now has over 175 episodes and is downloaded more than 1,000 times each week, which is about 1,000 times more often than ours is downloaded. Steve has also been active in the community, He served as the board chair at AAA Hoosier Motor Club, and also has been chairman of the boards of the Greater Indy Chamber, the Indianapolis 500 Festival, the United Way of Central Indiana, in the Indiana chapter of Young Presidents Organization. So first, Steve, before we get going, I just want to thank you for your service to our community.
Well, thank you, and your family is part of the reason why I got pretty involved in the community. Your dad's kind of a mentor to me in terms of community activity, and your family has done a lot for this community too. So to have you thank me for that is kind of coming full circle.
I appreciate that. Thanks. So maybe we could just get started with a little bit of background. How did it was Walker Information, and now it's shortened to Walker. So when did Walker/Walker Information first start? How did the business start in the first place?
It's a great story, and I love to tell it. My grandmother was a 31-year-old housewife who did not go to college, and they needed a little extra money. My grandfather worked as a bank teller down right off the circle at Fletcher Trust National Bank. There's still a door on Pennsylvania Street behind the Chase Tower, or now the Salesforce Tower, that says Fletcher Trust on Pennsylvania Street. And they were advertising on the radio. And this is kind of the birth of marketing research. Media was new. Companies were starting to advertise, and the bank wanted to know if people were listening to the radio and if they knew that the bank was sponsoring the shows. They posted a job for a contractor. My grandmother took it because she needed the money, or she thought the money would help the household. But really, to her credit, she saw a business opportunity, and she was right, because market research was just being born at that time, and she was one of the first ones to recognize that. So pretty cool story, really. And she was an entrepreneur, and particularly as a young woman in the 30s, 40s, 50s, she was pretty unique as an entrepreneur and a business owner too.
Yeah, I love the stories where folks see opportunity and take advantage of it. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but it takes someone with vision to see it and with a little bit of guts and grit to take advantage of it. That's a great story.
Yeah. Yeah, and she actually, she benefited a lot from being in Indianapolis. Indianapolis became a good test market in the early days because it was an isolated media center. Like, you could put one type of advertising in Indianapolis, and you could put another type of advertising in Dayton, and a third one in Columbus. And there wasn't as much, media influence in those days. There wasn't cable TV. There wasn't. There wasn't like 24-hour news. There wasn't, Time Magazine was about the only thing, and it was a weekly. So you could really control the environments. And so she, kind of benefited from that with the creation of the post-war consumer economy. And again, when she started is about the same time that Gallup was starting to figure out how to, do political polling, and how Nielsen was starting to track the movement of goods through grocery stores, and the whole mass market economy was just being born. So, and again, we were lucky that we were in Indianapolis. In fact, there are a couple of other they don't exist anymore, but a couple other market research agencies were begun by women. One in Cincinnati called Burke, which still is in business today. And then there was another one called Winona that was up in Minneapolis. All three of them started by women, kind of with a similar story.
I mean, I personally love to hear a story like that. I always, especially back in the day, I know it's hard today still for women to do something like that, but I'm sure back then that was a large feat. I'm curious, so you're the third generation of walkers with this company, and I can imagine each generation has a slightly different vision of what they want for this company. How have things evolved over the years, and how have you personally changed things?
Well, it's kind of nice to be at my stage. I call it the fourth quarter of my career. I haven't said how far I am to the fourth quarter, but the fourth quarter has definitely started for me. But now I've been running the company for 25 years, and I would say that I have been through three significant changes in the business. And I've talked to my dad, who is still alive and doing well. I think Greg knows him. But he would probably say that our business has probably been through 7 or 8 different fundamental changes in 82 years. And that's probably about right. I mean, if you look like at what private equity people, they kind of look at 10 to 10 years, give or take, for a business cycle. So I would say the big 3 changes for me were: number one, we used to get paid a lot of money to collect and process data, which technology today has made data virtually free. If you think about, in the old days, you had to do your interviews and your primary data collection door to door or face to face or in some sort of central location. Then we switched to the telephone, which made it a little more cost efficient. But today, almost all that data is collected on the internet. And while the development of the tool to capture the first survey or the first piece of data is relatively expensive, the incremental cost of each successive piece of data is virtually free. And we've seen that revolutionize telecommunications and, smartphones, and all that sort of has been a big function. So the fact that what we used to get paid to collect and process is now free, that was a pretty significant change in the business model. The second thing was the emergence of the web as not only a way to collect data, but a way to move data and to have people use data. So that was a pretty fundamental thing. And then today, I would say it's more about artificial intelligence. I use this example all the time, but even like 10 years ago, for some of the complex statistical routines that we run in our business, where we analyze huge sets of data, even 10 years ago, it would take somebody with, say, a master's degree in statistics and a complex statistical software like SPSS or SAS, and they might spend 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 hours analyzing that data and running the software routines. Well, just like you can book a flight or Google a search, today the artificial intelligence for very complex statistical routines really comes like in a drop-down menu, where you can just input the variables and you can spit out a result that literally 10 years ago, you might have had to have a master's of stat spend a week analyzing that data. So I think those are the 3 big ones that I've experienced. And I'm getting too old for this. So hopefully there will only be 1 or 2 more in my fourth quarter. I think the cycles are speeding up, though. I mean, I think we see that in all businesses.
So you went from a data information collection processing company to what you call an experience management services company. Yep. What does that mean?
Well, again, I think it's part of the it's part of the revolution brought on by technology and our ability to store and process and make sense out of information. So, early on, we used to, most of the emphasis was on producing primary data. Today, I think it's more about producing business impact out of the information. And we do a lot of the same things. However, I think it's more about making positive change happen in our client's business that has a positive impact on the key stakeholders that are have a relationship with that business. And we tend to focus on customers and employees primarily. The marketplace is competitive for customers, and also, as we know today, especially today, for talented workers. So the best organizations today are using these sorts of business insights to attract, keep, and retain the customers and the employees that they want to use. So really, our business today is we go find data about these relationships, these important relationships, and we link them up to the outcomes that those businesses desire, be it market share or sales growth or retention of employees or share of wallet. And so we can take a measurement of those, the health of those relationships and how it impacts the business outcomes. And then also we can reverse engineer them and say, okay, here's the processes and here's how these customers and employees and other stakeholders experience your organization. And here's the things that drive those relationships in a positive way. And so we can basically prescribe improvement activities to the various aspects of the business that would result in having a positive impact on these relationships and then ultimately a positive impact on the business outcomes. We call it X data, experience data, which is what we kind of create to drive O data, operational data, which would be financial, inventory, share, supply chain, delivery times, call center activity, those sorts of operational data that you would look at in your business.
So I definitely want to get into the culture within Walker, but what you just described made me think that there's an aspect of the services you provide to your customers that relate to culture. If retention's important and there's a culture has an impact on retention, how does that fit into the suite of services you provide your customers?
Yeah, I think culture is not only important for employees, but I think it's important for customers too, and certainly for some of the expanded stakeholder groups that we don't talk about as much. But there's regulators and there's media and there's the community. So a complex organization has to balance all those relationships, and I think culture is pretty foundational in that. And it's probably something that you can't really fake. It's got to. You can't really create your culture with an ad campaign. It sort of has to be lived out in the experiences of the people that interact with that organization. So I think culture is very foundational to the work we do. It's kind of. Maybe this is a little bit. Like duh, but every organization that has some level of success probably has some really good parts of its culture and also is really good at attracting good customers and employees. Again, the only way to have a really truly sustainable business is if you can create your own capital, right? Because if it weren't the case, every well-funded startup would be successful. You have to be able at some point to get a return on your investment, generate your own capital so you can fund your own growth and keep attracting and retaining the talent and the resources you need to run your business. So really any successful business probably has some of this already in their DNA. I guess what we just do is kind of, like a lot of things, like a lot of predictive analytics, you start to measure some things and you track them over time, and then you start to be able to create some picture or some frameworks or some diagnosis of why the situation that you find exists. And then when you find the good aspects of it, you can also find some of the things that you might want to work on, and you can keep fine tuning that. So yeah, there's a very key part of culture, I think, in the work we do. And I think where we've really emerged today is we're kind of a boutique strategy organization, but very specialized in how you interact with your key relationships. And we're probably not as much on the external factor like M&A or technology change. We're more on, I'd say, the aspects that you can control, which is sort of, how do you build your business models? How do you value your relationships? How do you show up? How do you act? That part of the equation.
So, I'm curious, you have all of these wonderful tools that you provide other companies that help them analyze, themselves and see where they need to put some resources towards, beefing up. Do you ever turn that around on yourself, or do you ask another company to do this for you? Is it does it have to be an outside service so you get that full picture of things? How do you analyze yourselves in that manner?
Yeah, our business is not as complex as most of our clients' businesses are, but yeah, we try to practice what we preach, and we try to use our own company as a sort of as a little laboratory for R&D. Part of the problem is our employees are really, really savvy about research and surveys. So it's they always kind of like say, what are they trying to do now? And we probably over survey them ourselves too. But no, we do. And I think it is best practice. My personal feeling is that it's really hard to run your business today if you really don't know what your employees and your customers are thinking. It's just as critical as your sales data, as your inventory data, your call center data. Again, in a knowledge economy where, and especially like today when a lot of your employees don't even come to the office on a regular basis, you've really got to have your finger on the pulse of some of the soft sides of running your business. So yeah, we do, and we do try to practice what we preach. So I certainly have gotten insights out of it as kind of a small business owner myself. And a lot of times that's what we tell clients, you don't have to go. I mean, for example, like say you have like an organization where you have 3 or 4 different operations that kind of all do the similar thing. Think like somebody's got a couple of restaurants or got a couple of warehouses or a couple of retail stores. Just take the customer data from each store and then get some employee data from each store and then look at your sales data and your inventory turn data. And, you don't have to get it a big spreadsheet. You can just kind of lay it out on your desk and say, and I bet you will start to find some insights, or if not, you'll find some good questions to go ask your managers about. Mm-hmm. And that at the most simple level is what we're talking about with integrating this X data back to your O data. And there's gold in there. Yeah. I can assure you after, almost 40 years of doing this. One of the real jobs of senior executives is to keep trying to find something to be challenged about. And particularly when things are going good, but your customers' employees can always give you some insights into the business that you probably won't have, say after you get up to 50 or 75 employees, or if you get to the point where you personally don't maintain all of the key customer relationships. You need some sort of system to do that.
Yeah, that happens to be where we're at Arcamed. Are approaching 100 full and part-time employees, and Caroline and I constantly talk about what we need to do culturally to maintain our focus on what's important to us as we evolve into this next phase of growth. I want to talk about the dynamics of family business as it relates to culture. I was a lawyer in Chicago for a while, and I helped family businesses navigate various generations. You're in the 3rd generation. The 4th generation is in the business. That is, from my limited experience, sort of a unicorn. How did you manage that along the different generations with cousins and things like that? How did that work?
Yeah, I think, this is where fate probably comes into play somewhat. Again, just for our family's purposes, my grandmother was an incredible entrepreneur, but the business really wasn't significant until my dad came along and grew the business. The business did $100,000 in revenue in 1960 when my dad joined. It wasn't until 1970 that the business did $1 million in revenue. And by that point, my grandmother had remarried after being a widow for 20 plus years, or around 20 years. And I think this is I know I go off on tangents, Greg and Caroline, but I promise I'll get this back here in a minute. But my grandmother was widowed. My grandfather died at 45 years old of a heart attack. And my dad was in high school. And I wonder if my grandfather had not predeceased young, if at some point my grandmother might have shut the business down, but what happened is she had to make a go of it out of necessity.
Wow.
My dad, who was still in high school, had one brother who was 6 years older, who was already on his way up the corporate ladder at AT&T. And so he never really at that point had an interest in the business. He did end up owning part of the business before my grandmother passed away, but by then it was already determined and my dad bought him out. I've had a great model with my dad, and I think one of the reasons my dad was in a hurry to get me in the business is because his dad died when he was 45. So I think my dad probably didn't think he'd still be alive at almost
Yeah,
87.
he beat that number.
Yeah, good. And I'm pulling for him every
You
day
bet.
too, by the way. But good genetics are, that's about half the battle
Yeah.
right there. But, my dad, was a great model, and I have one sister who has always been supportive of the business, but has not really had an interest in the business. So we've been able to work that out as a family, and now I'm starting to kind of get into that range. As I have all three of my children in the business right now, uh, and part of that out of this necessity related to talent and what we're dealing with in the labor force today. I joke around with my family. This is kind of like a family farm right now. It's all hands on deck. we got we got a lot of tigers by the tail, and there's we can't hire people fast enough, and having at least three young people that hopefully won't quit tomorrow is a little bit more comforting for me from a continuity standpoint.
Well, they can't quit. It would make Sunday dinner really awkward.
Yes, it would. So right now we all get along. And again, my dad and my grandmother were incredible role models for how you, I think, kind of maintain a successful business and a mostly functional family.
Yeah, that's probably what it comes down to, is that those strong role models. Did anyone ever come in, and I saw this a lot as a lawyer, someone would come in and say, okay, we're in this third generation or second generation or fourth generation. It's time to bring in, quote, professional management. Did that ever come into the process along the four generations, someone saying, time for professional management? Because that's what I heard a lot when I was a lawyer.
Yeah, I guess I would say that we have had professional management. My dad built the company to something of fairly prominent significance, and to do that, he was able to attract talent from all different aspects. We've always had good counsel from a standpoint of our outside advisors, be it CPAs or lawyers or bankers or other professionals. We've had CFOs who worked at the big four firms. Because we work with many of the Fortune 500 companies, and we have placed some of our executives into corporate jobs, and we've been able to attract corporate people to come work on our side of the business. So I would say that we have had professional management, but we've still maintained family ownership. And I would just say that as long I think there's other ways to do it for sure, but for our company, I don't think anybody will ever care about this company the way that we do. And as it grows and as it becomes more complex, you do need more professional management, but sort of as the owner and as the key stakeholder and steward of this asset, this family jewel that we have, I think that there's always going to be some element of the family's involvement as long as we own it.
I think that makes perfect sense. I've seen examples where the so-called professional management works out, but I've also seen multiple examples where somebody comes in with the right pedigree, degree, or resume, but because they don't understand the dynamics of the business and they don't have that vested interest and that deep caring, that culturally poisonous things can happen. And so it makes perfect sense to me, that dynamic.
Yeah, I think it probably does go with ownership. I mean, if you sold or you were in an exit strategy, it probably does make sense. But as long as you're really, And I think this gets to the cultural aspect of a family-owned business. We don't have to report out quarterly. We don't really have to satisfy any shareholders other than ourselves and our key employees. So we can make different decisions about the financial model and our timeframes for pursuit. I think that the bad side of that is you can get complacent. You can become kind of where, and the bad part of that is that you'll miss stuff in the marketplace because you're not keeping up with things. You're not being as sharp as somebody that's maybe doing it a little more for the money. But I think it's a strength in a family business that you can take a little longer term view than I think a private equity or a publicly traded company can.
You hear a lot of companies describe their culture. We're like a family here.
Yeah.
And you have the benefit of really being a family. And of course, the pushback on that is, you never fire a family member. You never, family members here to stay. What I'm curious about, Greg brought up Sunday dinner, and these are people that you actually do have to go have Sunday dinner with at the end of the week or whenever your schedule is.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a time where you've struggled with some idea you want to champion, and maybe a family member disagrees, or even vice versa? Maybe there's some outside of work conflict. How do you guys compartmentalize that? How do you work around it? Or maybe you don't. I don't know. What's the best way?
Yeah, this is a really great topic. I mean, we talk in our family about wearing your different hats. So sometimes you got your boss hat on, and sometimes you got your dad hat on. And I think it's good and healthy to sort of acknowledge where you're coming from those. I would say that, again, I will go back to the process that I went through with my dad was awesome. And, and that's not to say every day or every conversation was awesome. In fact, my dad, now that we're kind of at this next phase, is he always jokes around. He goes, he says, I hope I live long enough to see when you guys first start butting heads on strategy and direction. But because we did go through that, and a lot of it, related to the external factors that were going on. And actually one of the greatest, I guess, reinforcements I got from my dad was maybe 10 years after, because we made a big bet on the internet in the late 90s. That's about the time we were doing the transition from him to me, or that was kind of in the early days of it. And I was just adamant that I thought the internet was going to be revolutionary technology in our industry. And, he came back and said, you know what, there were a couple tough years there, but you were right. And, so that was gratifying. But, my dad and I, actually a good friend of mine, John Ackerman, said this at his father's funeral, and I've never forgotten it. But he said, first he was my dad, then he was my business partner, and then he was my friend. And it still gives me goosebumps. But that's exactly how I think about my dad. We would go to family Sunday dinners, and pretty quick we'd be off in the corner talking business. And, my wife and my stepmother would come over and scold us, and we'd come back into the family talk. And then, sure enough, if we were at the same corner of the table, we'd probably get back off on business. And it's because we both love it so much. And like every other kind of key relationship in your life, it's the shared experiences, it's the struggle, the things that you go through together that bind you. And I just get, as a son and as a father, I can't think of a kind of a more meaningful way to have a relationship with your dad. And God bless, I'm 63 years old, and I still got my dad around, and never could spend enough time around him. Yeah, actually. So.
That's a blessing. You mentioned John Ackerman. I came back to town from Chicago, and I networked like crazy. And Jim Ackerman, John's dad, was one of the folks I met with up at the Pyramids off of Michigan Road, and he gave me some advice.
Amazing businessman.
And he told me some great war stories about the wildcatting days of cable television.
Cable.
Really fascinating stuff. So can you describe your sort of cultural philosophy at Walker? How do you approach culture?
Yeah, I think I think I'm a beneficiary of the culture. I think a lot of it has been in here, and I think some of it goes back to my grandmother. I mean, my grandmother didn't go to college, and we actually wrote an autobiography of her, which I'd be happy to share with you
Yeah,
guys
that'd be
if you'd
great.
like. We printed way too many copies of it, by the way, but um, she was an entrepreneur. I mean, she figured stuff out. And again, as I look back on our company, and we've been through a significant change here in the last 3 to 4 years with artificial intelligence and the emergence of cloud software that can do a lot of what we used to do. We figure stuff out. We still kind of got that entrepreneurial spirit. The strong culture, like actually one of my colleagues, this is probably 20 years ago, we hired somebody in from the outside, and we thought they were going to be great. And my colleague said, that person is not going to make it here. I go, what do you mean? They're talented, blah, blah, blah. Said, nope, they're not going to make it here. And it was just like I don't know what it is. It's the red blood cells or the white blood cells that attack the antibodies, right?
Right.
I mean, it just, as talented as this person was, the culture was not going to kind of take that style. And so we do have, I think, a very collegial style. I mean, people say we're nice and stuff, and then they're here for 6 months and they go, yeah, they're still pretty nice, and people are still pretty nice. So I think some of that. I would say that in terms of my influence on the culture, I think that, again, as markets have become more competitive and as cycles have been faster, I think I've encouraged our company to be more open about how we define success and transparent about how we measure that. We're a private company, but we're very one of our key values is transparency. So we're a business of highly educated people that are consulting with other businesses about how to make their business better. So back to Caroline's question, we have to understand how this stuff works on our business to be able to help other businesses. So I think that's area that, again, it's been, I think I would say it's emerged as the business methods have emerged over the past couple of decades, that it's just really hard to employ information workers if you're not giving them the right information to do their job. I think we care. We care for each other. We're in the data business. I will tell you that nothing gets us off track if we make mistakes with data, and so we're pretty precise. I really admire people that are very detail oriented, like Roger Penske and some of those stories about people who are just very adamant about because if if the client came in and saw my desk right now, he'd say there's no way that guy could organize our data.
Right.
So
but he can hire, motivate, coach, and inspire people who can do it.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a beautiful thing about this next generation. I don't know how they do it, but they do it pretty much without paper.
Yeah,
it's they might have 4 monitors on their desk, but they can do it without paper.
I know our listeners can't see, but maybe you can see the background of all those papers on my desk over here. I still need a pen and paper, and that's a good segue into the next question I had. Is the next generation, your 3 kids, are they coming up with changes, significant or otherwise, to culture to perhaps modernize as they would see it? Paperless is one example, but are there cultural examples that they're coming up with?
Yes, I would say very much so. So I mentioned the the battle for talent that we find ourselves in today. We need to. I think we need to have a cooler employment brand, and one that is attractive to all sorts of people. And that is definitely something that they are driving in our organization. We don't necessarily need to hire exclusively in Indianapolis today with technology. But for our entry-level people, we will still have to maintain a solid set, and probably from an administrative standpoint, we'll always have a strong presence here in Central Indiana. So those are two things, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just sort of our overall employment brand for the talent that we're going to attract and retain for the next 20 to 25 years is definitely something that they're already taking the lead on. Like I joke around that, for the people that we want to attract today, they're not going to want to work for me. They're going to want to work for the next generation. So, and this is just one of the things about having a business that's been around for this long, is that it's important that, you do move forward. There's nobody that works at the company today that was here when I started, almost 40 years ago. And that the company goes back 40 more years before that. So, people can't live forever, but, great organizations can conceivably live forever. Most of them don't, but many of them do. And it's all about how well they are at managing the succession and that kind of generational change.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. I loved hearing you advocate for the family business and your point about families are the ones that can see the big picture and sometimes put making profit aside for the longevity of the company. So I really enjoyed hearing from you. And yeah, I think our listeners will be able to get a lot out of this, and I'm excited to hear what they think about it.
And Steve, I'll add, I've always envied the idea of a family business in the sense that where you have one where you've worked with and with your dad, and then you're now working with your kids, and that it's working out well because you guys have controlled egos and clear eyes, and you're looking in the mirror and acknowledging the future and doing what needs to be done so that you can remain successful. And if you do that as you're doing it, it seems like you have this gem of an opportunity to interact warmly with across 3 generations, which I think is amazing. I have the privilege of working near my dad on a lot of different things, but never in the intimacy that you have. And I just think it's a wonderful gift that you, your dad, and your kids have. And I'm thrilled for you all.
Well, thank you. And thanks for this opportunity. It's been a real pleasure to spend this time talking to you. And you both said it well. I think that, having a family business is really a total blessing. And it should be viewed that way. And the opportunity to have lived it myself and now be in the process of potentially passing it on for another 20 or 25 years is something that makes me feel very, very good and very, very lucky. So
thanks again for joining us. It was a lot of fun.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
So that was fun. Steve's such a interesting guy to talk to, and just like the last episode with Jeff, Steve also knows way more about podcasting than.
Yeah, I almost want to stop bringing on these professional guests. They make us look bad. But it is fun to hear. And so many people that care so much about their companies. And I love being able to speak to all these people through this podcast. But can we talk about the founding story of Walker? I mean, this is I think this might be one of my favorite stories that I've heard of how a company's been founded.
Yeah, it really is a neat story. And I think he mentioned that there's a book about it,
Yep.
although I don't know how widely available it is, but if there is, we can link to it, which would be fun. But yeah, it's a great story where, I think it was his grandmother who recognized an underserved market because she had exposure to it as an employee, and someone said that along the line, it's really hard to run your business when you don't know what your employees or your customers are thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I am always a fan of a strong female leader, and it sounds like she was a trailblazer of her time. So would love to get my hands on the book. We'll have to reach out to him for more details on that. Um, so a lot of dynamics coming into play here, but I feel like the Walker family maybe has some special formula to figure this out because Steve really made it seem like they have a good understanding. He talks about it's really cool because his dad was first his dad, then his business partner, then his friend, and he's looking forward to kind of continuing that model.
Yeah, I think it's a neat idea to be in a family business. It's romantic in a sense, but when I was practicing law, um, I worked on a couple different matters of dissolving family businesses because it got to subsequent generations, and there was too many cooks in the kitchen and people couldn't get along. So one thing about the Walker approach is that they didn't have a whole bunch of family members that were interested in running the business,
Mm-hmm.
and so now it's really Steve, and then he has his father who comes in, but it's acknowledged that the reins have been handed many years ago to Steve, and then Steve has his three kids in various aspects of the business. So if he can maintain that clear idea of who does what, no role confusion, I think that'll help.
Well, and to his point, talk about employee loyalty. He's not worried about any of his three kids quitting on him. So I think that gives you a certain peace of mind that you might not have with just any non-related employee. So that's a perk there. But I think it sounds like they're very good at compartmentalizing. Also, I think he mentioned they have some rules around we're gonna keep family stuff out of the office and office stuff out of like the family setting. And but he also mentioned that genuinely they the people involved in the business really love it. And so there are times that it will bleed into a Sunday dinner conversation, but it just feels like they're having a family conversation because it's something that they're all involved in, and they can all talk about, and they all enjoy being a part of together.
Yeah, it made me think of this movie, Lean on Me. Did you ever see that movie, Lean on Me?
I did not. Please tell me it's not like an old movie and I'm going to get like a youth tax on me here.
Well, I would not call it an old movie. I mean, it's in color.
There
Well,
you
there's
go.
this scene where the principal of this school that he's trying to turn around, and then the superintendent, who's his boss, have a argument, very loud, sort of angry argument. But they're colleagues and friends, and so after they're yelling and screaming at each other, and then one of the guys says, "You want to get something to eat?" And the other guy says, "Yeah, sure, let's go get some dinner." And so
Mhm.
they have to be able to do that. You have to be able to show up and advocate and disagree and resolve disagreements, and then go out to dinner.
Yeah, well, I mean, in general, I think food's a pretty good peacekeeper. I feel like it
Hmm.
always has been, has been in my family at least. But yeah, I mean, I have to hand it to them. I think that the Walkers have figured out a good way of doing this. One thing that Steve mentioned more just as a general philosophy that I found really fascinating and enlightened. He talked about senior executives, and his take is their job. It's really continuously finding things to be challenged about. And I think it's rather than like poking holes in everybody else and like putting everyone under a microscope, you should be looking for these challenges and looking to push the boundaries constantly. And I think that speaks a little bit to his cultural philosophy as a whole.
Yeah, I think you're right. And another thing he said about his cultural philosophy is that you can't fake it.
No.
So you have to show up, and the way you show up and how you act, uh, you have to live it out. You live out the culture and the experiences. And I thought that was really, really important because you really can't fake it.
You
Not
have
for
to
long,
walk the
anyway.
walk.
And then my favorite quote, and I think this is the quote. If not a quote, it's a paraphrase. It's important that you move forward. And I think that, when you are of one generation, and you remember what it was like to receive the reins, and then you look at yourself and you say it's getting time to pass them, you might need to control your ego and look in the mirror with clear eyes and say it's time to move forward. And I think he can do that, and they can do that, and that's why it's been a success.
Yeah, and he talked about a couple of things. I think when he was taking over the company, it was more on the side of the internet, and embracing that. And there was a little bit of debate between him and his dad. And he mentioned looking forward. He looks at his children, and he sees that cooler employment brand he mentioned. So they're bringing all of their young, cool, fun, new ideas that maybe he wouldn't have thought of. And I think it's great that he looks at that and embraces it. And they're looking to continuously move forward, as you said. And I think it's a good way of keeping ahead of the game a little bit, as they're approaching this.
Yeah, that was a really wonderful episode.
In our next episode, continuing in our series on ownership, we're moving on to employee-owned companies with Michael Parrott. Michael is the former National ESOP Consulting Vice President for Principal Financial Group. So he has a lot of experience on looking at employee-owned companies, and we have so many questions. So we're excited to hear from him. So see you next time.